Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of V Next. I am your host, Mike Walker, and you're listening to episode 27. So, this is part two of our two-part series all around blockchain enabled digital ecosystems. So, we got a lot of really good nuggets from Ryan on the part one. Now, we're going to continue that rich conversation. So remember to subscribe and like this podcast if you so choose and if you like to, but also leave some comments. I'd love to hear from you and get your feedback as well. Like always, we have the show notes, a companion blog, along with links and other juicy information on vnextpod.com. So make sure you check that out. So, with that, let's get into it. In the market, what's our philosophy on openness and inclusiveness in the marketplace? And that's going to determine kind of, what solutions you're going to go and build.
No, I definitely agree. And there's no need to kind of recreate the wheel out there. As you said, like there's tons of templates and tools out there. We've done work, you guys have done work. It's just, I encourage you utilizing those instead of going out on your own.
In that line of thinking, I'm sure you guys do a ton of market analysis. I've done a ton of market analysis on this as well. And, there's, about 90 of these ecosystems out there that are blockchain enabled. And, there's a lot of variety. I tell clients if there's any consistency, there's inconsistency on what's going on out there. Some of that's evolution of kind of where they started during, the maturity of the technology and what they had available to them. But also, if you're coming at this fresh, we used to have this conversation in technology where we say it's either buy or it's build. I think we have a similar construct here. It's do we build or do we join? And maybe help me understand from your perspective, how do you think about that when you're advising clients and they want to do something that maybe a duplication of what's already out there as a capability? How do you handle those conversations? What are kind of the key trade-offs in your mind where there may be something already out there, but it's not a fit for whatever reason?
Yeah, so setting up a business network is massive. As I said, it's one thing building the applications that run on it, but all the governance that kind of goes around the network is a lot. And we've had several consortiums that have been out there for years that have done this and are very successful. And we've seen some that are starting to white label it, right? White label the solution where it's industry agnostic. It's not necessarily, for insurance only or for, trade only. It's like, here's the framework, here's the IP, here's all the legal templates. Obviously, you have to go out and validate it yourself and get it done. But here's basically what 3 years of work got us to. So, walking through clients kind of through those options, as you said, it's, buy or build. And it's like, so that's one. And then also, kind of on the build side of it, there's just so many tools out there from so many people that have built successful ones, but also built very unsuccessful ones, right, that have failed. And I think learning from your failures is as important as learning from your successes, because if you can avoid those pitfalls and costs and time and money, it's just going to increase your ROI, right? It's going to get you faster, kind of proof of value faster. It's going to get you through that transformation faster. It's going to get you showing real value to your management in a much more, kind of congruent way. So I think those are kind of important factors to consider. If you are going down like the buy, from the B&O type thing, there's fees. But, I just think going back to our beginning points about doing your analysis and kind of going in eyes wide open, knowing what it's going to cost in time to market. Sometimes it might be worth paying a little bit higher fee in the front because then you could smooth line it kind of over the long term of it. But, each consortium, as you said, is different. They're all very inconsistent from governance, from non-for-profit, profit, from who owns the IP to, unrestricted licenses. So there's several different models out there, but understanding them, I think, can help, accelerate other people in the market.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, I think a lot of this also is doing the soul searching of, what do you want to be when you grow up as an organization? And how do you want to interact in these ecosystems? And so, surprisingly enough, maybe to some people, what I recommend to most of my clients is, do a level of trend spotting, look out into the marketplace, look at, what are the current market drivers, who are the different ecosystems out there in the marketplace, and, how well do they relate potentially to you? What capabilities do they provide to your organization? However, use that as an input and first do the due diligence of, okay, what are all my options? Okay, great. I've got all my options. Now let's ideate around that, because oftentimes when we start this journey, we kind of have a sense, an idea of what we want, but we don't truly know what we want. It's kind of the state of we don't know what we don't know. And, what I recommend is before you start to jump into the build or join conversation, it's use that as kind of a background color information into your ideation processes to say, okay, that's great that these things exist. Is there a better way of doing this that maps better to our business, to our shareholders that we have a fiduciary responsibility to? And, spend the time and ideate those scenarios that make the most sense for your organization. And then evolve that to, once you figure out what are some of the key scenarios that sound interesting, and hopefully those scenarios are more democratic based, where it's bringing people in and sharing the value, because the ultimate value of these digital ecosystems is where it's a win-win scenario for most people in the marketplace. But even if it's not, looking and revisiting your strategy and saying, okay, here are the great ideas on what the state of the possible of what we could do based on what's already out there. Maybe we have an idea where we have an indirect relationship with something existing out there, and we built something that's specific to our specific philosophy on the marketplace. No different than when you look at the ecosystems that Google has and Apple has. Both are wildly successful ecosystems, but they have two fundamental different philosophies on how to go to market, what consumers want from their particular products and services. And there is nothing wrong with that. And that's actually how our system was built. It was built to foster that level of innovation, creativity, and friction in the marketplace. And so once we're able to transition into this more strategy definition stage, then we have a better understanding of, okay, so this is how it impacts our strategy. Here's how we've revised our strategy. Now let's have that build versus join conversation, because we've done our due diligence. We understand what the opportunities are, what the state of the possible is, but also we've looked at our long-range strategy. We've updated that long-range strategy based on those new capabilities that this could bring, and we are going in eyes wide open. So oftentimes I'll look at it more from that perspective and have them take one step backwards to take two steps forward, hopefully.
And I would even say that ties into the whole interoperability play too, right? So when you're doing this due diligence and analysis and start looking at it, you and I had talked about it early in our conversation, seeing the convergence of these different industries working together. Think bigger picture. And I'm obviously going to make a plug for Porta, but like that's always been kind of like the roadmap. We always envisioned all these industries like working together. So because like almost every industry needs some component of payments to it. They need some sort of component of contract management, and banks may need the same contracts with insurers, and obviously with trade there's a huge overlap, and same with supply and supply financing. So really think about that also, and like where your end state is. Is it just a current MVP, one app, or are you going to need that interoperability? And like the Porta network, which we've built out, is really that kind of future vision where we have these different ecosystems in trade, insurance, healthcare that are building different applications, but have like the same CA, the certificate authority, so they have that interoperability layer in the future as they start to mature in the market.
Oh yeah, totally. And I think that's an important characteristic. And I think I'll take it one step further, and I'll say that there's not only specific capabilities, but also there's generic capabilities that I think apply to many different industries. How many times have you seen the same use case around some sort of reconciliation process, for these ecosystems? Tons of times, right? Workflow management, and business rules across, different company boundaries. Yes, big check mark. Having a mastered set of data in a registry type of format. We've seen all those examples, especially in public sector, where you've got land registries and, all these different types of registries out there. There's all these kind of base, kind of cross industry, cross scenario types of applications that I think are, should be on the punch list around, okay, so are we trying to do this? Are we trying to do that? Okay, well, yeah, this just makes sense. And there's tons of people doing it. There's success. It's legitimized as a solution for our business. Let's just go do it.
Yeah, totally agree.
So now, as far as with your journey with ecosystems and blockchain, um, what would be some of the things that you've learned? What are some of the scars on your back from doing all this stuff?
Yeah, so we talked about it a little bit earlier about agile development, time to market and really proving the value. And I think within these ecosystems and consortiums, when you have multiple different parties that are all, have a say and sometimes want different things, really being able to prove their value and get, ROI, I think that you keep the market's confidence. So, we've seen some that have, had delays and like hiccups in it, which has caused, loss of confidence in the market, which, we've put a army of professional service team behind them from R3 to get them back on track. But it's like, really thinking in a startup mentality for these large consortiums that are typically large corporates, right? So I think that is extremely important. Also, governance. You can't be everything to everyone. It's impossible, especially when you have large consortiums, having very clear bylaws and about how you're going to operate and what's on the roadmap and how it gets prioritized in the voting process. And so this way, kind of keeping the unity amongst the different participants involved in this journey, I think that is absolutely critical as well. Also working with regulators. I mean, as silly as that sounds, we've seen them accelerate as well as demotivate several of the solutions out there. So, big believer as you go from POC to pilot, before you get to production, you need permission. Like regulators need to be on this journey for you. Several of the laws they had put into place, like GDPR and stuff, they thought through before blockchain was, but, we have to think of all these different types of rules and regs out there that could ultimately hinder some of these applications. So I'd say, as you get close to that pilot stage, make sure regulators are involved. I've been surprised in certain geographic areas, they're extremely involved, and hands down, Monetary Authority of Singapore, we first opened an office in their office. That was like our first location in Singapore, and they're extremely involved in testing different technologies and getting involved. So I would think that, is a very critical part as well as you move along the journey.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny. People listening are probably thinking, well, shoot, Mike's got a name for everybody. So I call these people the no people. And so, and that's okay. That's their role, right? Is they're there to protect and, mitigate risk. And, but a lot of times the answer is no. It's not, it depends. It's not sure. Go for it. It's usually no. With these folks, if you don't have, as an individual, as a thought leader, as a project manager of these initiatives, if you don't have a level of facilitation skills, emotional intelligence, patience, empathy, all these great soft skills, I hate to break it to you, but you're not going to be very successful in this realm, because the majority of this conversation is, one, of family counseling. Two, it's just a whole lot of patience and guiding people on a journey. Because oftentimes when this concept is first introduced to the no people, they just seize up because it's something they've never seen before, or they've read about it in, some, publication somewhere, but it's not something that they've had to manage. And when that now is a new thing for them, they're just automatically just this visceral reaction of no, no, no. And so, getting people comfortable with this and showing them what the value of these constructs are, it just requires a different mindset going into it than it does with so many other things in the technology world. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I mean, when they get involved, it's been amazing kind of the reaction. Wait, I can have a view only node and be able to see if the participants agree to share with my node the kind of the data. And like, I don't have to have these massive audit trails and go independently to the banks and audit each one. So it's like, So I think they've been actually amazed with what this technology can do and how it can accelerate them. And talking about if this technology was in place during the crisis, financial crisis, how they could have seen the liquidity across the banks in a real time basis and could have prevented. And obviously, that's you know kind of hindsight 2020, but it's been. I would say the ones that have gotten involved, the reception has been amazing, and they've all kind of been forthcoming and realized that with all this new data out there, they need new ways to analyze it, to regulate their entities that they look after. So they've been very embracing. So I definitely agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's, you'd mentioned the financial crisis, and, I won't name names, but, certain financial institutions that would say, hey, this is what we're valued at. And then 2 days later, they're not. They're in the significant red. So it's like, well, how did you get to this point? Something's wrong here. And so having that visibility is a phenomenal audit capability. But oftentimes, I don't know about you, but when I first engage with these folks and you say blockchain, and I try not to even start with that word because it's usually a dirty word and people think of cryptocurrency. But that's oftentimes what the reaction is, so we talking about Bitcoin here? What are we doing here? At least the majority of kind of the Fortune 500 that I talk to, that's kind of the reaction. It's still an emergent topic. You see the same thing?
Yeah, and then when you walk through and actually explain, it's just multi-party computing, and like
Right.
walking them through actually kind of the fundamentals and how they're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, and it has added security into it. Okay, but yeah, the word blockchain in the market, especially with regulators, still has a negative connotation to creating these gray markets with Bitcoin and things like that. There's been a ton of education out there where I'd say several of them are very forward thinking now, but you still definitely have, like as any market, the laggards out there that just associate directly with like cryptocurrency or ICOs, even worse, right?
Right. Yeah. Um, Now, as far as something that, because I think this is an interesting perspective, because you and I, we've done this a couple times, and there's probably some things that we would go back and do differently. For you, is there something, if you had to do had a DeLorean, you can go back to one of these initiatives? Uh, would there have been something that you would have done differently based on what you know now?
That's a great question. Thinking through it, I think I would have, standard development toolkits for this, like SDKs with like the code and to accelerate. We're getting to that point now. We're getting for different industries, and it's really accelerating the time to market because I think that's, looking back where it takes anywhere from 18, 20 to 24 months to get to market, which is just too long. So like, how can we collapse that? So like in retrospect, creating these SDKs earlier, how to best, build an insurance app on Porta, same with trade, and like also creating some of these mid-stack reusable components that like clients are building over and over and over again for the applications. But I don't think until we saw kind of the trends in these different industries and the same people building the same thing over and over would we have known, quite back then that what we should have been building out and standardized APIs and, cloud templates and just to make for, the user experience to be a lot better and faster time to market for the business.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too. I mean, we're really early days on this. I mean, if you look at my friends over in the analyst community, their predictions is that, look, blockchain, it's a slow burn thing. It's not a flash, in a pan type of thing where we're going to see significant value tomorrow, but it's going to require years of capability development before we actually see something. And their predictions are like 2025 to 2030 is really when the value is really going to be seen. And from a pure technology perspective, you look at that and you're like, well, I don't know about that. But when you think about our previous conversation, which was all around, well, I'll throw out a number. I'll make some assumptions here, but my personal opinion is 80% of the equation here in figuring out these blockchain solutions is really, you know, why are we doing this? What does the blueprint for the new future look like? And then how do we do this thing that we've never done before? And so, or we have done before, but this is done in a very different way. And so there's a lot of newness there. And just with a lot of newness, it just takes time.
No, and there's units across the board if you think about it. Like several of these, architects and internal and a lot of these corporates are just getting comfortable with cloud deployments. And it's
Right.
like a lot of the early blockchain solutions are there and how all the firewalls are set up and all the different things. And so really creating that scalable, which goes back to creating templates and toolkits that, are enablers to these people because it's so new, and doing a ton of education and helping them along the journey, and learning from kind of other industries and other experiences that we've had, and like sharing that with a broader ecosystem, and just to help them scale and get to market faster. Like 18 to 24 months is a long time. We want to cut that down to months, if not weeks, in the future. But as you said, it's a journey, and we're working together with it, and bringing hopefully several partners like yourself along, which has been wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good transition point into kind of what's fueling a lot of this. We've been kind of hinting at it around the edges, around this whole convergence effect around emerging technologies. And so, for you, pivoting off of that, what does this convergence effect mean to you?
It really means new revenue lines for some of the large corporates out there. If I think of, InsureWave, which was one of the first apps that went live on Corda with Maersk, it's like, talking to Lars, head of risk over there. He's like, through IoT and telematics, he's like, I know where my ships are at all times. I know when they're entering pirate water. I know when they're docked. I don't want a static premium, right? I don't want that static premium or have to pay, I want to be able to have a dynamic pricing, so usage-based in pricing, which is really interesting model, because then you can extrapolate from that in insurance, and it could be on autos, it could be on individuals with IoT. So it's really kind of taking multiple different technologies and bringing them together to create new revenue sources for some of these large corporates, which has been fascinating for me. And that's where kind of it gets really interesting. And also, once you have, the way that I think about, Corda, it's like, no pun intended, it's like that block layer, right? It's a fundamental layer that connects disparate parties that are untrusted with the same information in a real-time basis. But once you have that data, and in an organized fashion, what you can do with that, like, the sky's the limit. And then that's where I think, in the future years, you're really going to kind of see moving away from just lowering your expense ratio to creating new revenue opportunities for your firm, which is going to be a real differentiator, for the companies that are involved.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of that, that I don't think gets enough credit, is yes, we've got the data, but we've got a lot of data right now. I think that one of the key differences with this technology is that when the data is ingested, it's the right data. It's the cleansed data. Um, you don't have the situation where you just got a stockpile of data somewhere, and it's petabytes of information. And the pithy thing that I usually say is big data without big insights is a big problem. Because if you have a bunch of data, so what? If I can't derive any sort of insights out of that data, then that data is useless. And then what am I doing? I'm creating additional layers of technology to figure out what the heck this means retroactively. And we know that when we triage something post the fact, when it was created, completely out of context of when it was created, we could infer things that are not 100% accurate. And it gets complicated when now you've got AI algorithms that are now making decisions based on this data and creating predictive models and all this other stuff. And so, what blockchain is really great at is not only getting that data, but it's also mastering that data. And I think that, people don't talk about this a lot. I talk about it all the time because, I've been on some of these nightmare master data management projects where you're mapping out the entire company and building all these hierarchies and such, and trying to build indexes and all this. It's painful. It's a multi-million dollar effort. One client I work with, we've spent $15 million just on customer MDM. In customer, you can only define so many ways. I mean, it's a known thing. It's not like a product or service, which could be anything, any wild permutation. $15 million, and just with the software alone, that was about $1 million from one of the big MDM players. And I think blockchain actually provides a better mechanism for this because it has a level of shared accountability. It's not just one central authority saying, thou shall this, but it's we all agree that this is the standard. This is the taxonomy in which we'll talk to each other in. And but the smart contracts keep you honest and make sure that you're just not like, oh yeah, that sounds great, because we're very good at that, and we've been very good at that as an industry or industries for a very long time. But now it's actually forcing you, before you can commit any sort of data. Part of this B2B relationship is that we talk the same language. We're all talking English here. We're not going to do German and Spanish and French and Italian and Latin or whatever, right? It's we're all talking the same language.
Yeah, no, you've done a really hot topic, right? That immutable record, having from the provenance of the data to the current point, knowing who validated it, where it came from, and also not being able to delete or kind of take out, pieces of like the entire story in its entirety, which is very, very valuable when you're doing, applying other technologies on top of it, because you don't want to what garbage in, garbage out, right? It's like if the data is not good, yeah, AI can do a lot of great algorithms and create a lot of things, but if it's on bad data, the outcomes are not going to be what these companies want to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for the convergence effect, do you see a common set of technologies that are used together to enable these solutions? Earlier I'd mentioned my personal opinion, which is IoT, AI, and blockchain. Do you see things differently, similarly? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's definitely AI, IoT, on the insurance side, healthcare side, wearables, telematics on autos. Also seeing, cloud, right? I mean, cloud is a massive kind of factor within our stack and our deployment, what we're seeing. So those are the main ones that we're seeing currently. The things with IoT, there's pros and cons in each of them, sensors and the authentication of the data coming off of it and being able to prove it. And taking that data and being able to kind of average it out and authenticate that it's correct. So there's definitely, different, obstacles that we're facing with some of them, but we are starting to do different POCs and really interesting, like drone works and like for insurers and purveying lots and homes. And so it's getting really kind of fascinating. And that's what's exciting to me about the future, is really what's going to unlock. So those are kind of the key technologies that we're starting to see introduced on Corda as well.
Nice. And with that combination of technologies, are you seeing any common patterns start to emerge using those technologies?
Some like with digital wallets on like autos and cars, and kind of the whole idea of smart cities, and we're seeing the reoccurring theme of having like light nodes, digital nodes that you could have like on your cell phone, right? So like that's one theme that we're starting to see a lot with like the IoT work that we're doing. With the AI, it's a little bit less for each industry. It's kind of been a little bit unique in how they're applying it and what the outcome they're trying to drive, underwriting and insurance versus, different kind of schematics for each industry. So I'd say it's less characteristic there, but, tying to the theme of convergence, it's also, the telcos are interested in the insurance networks and they want to be the operator of it and kind of run it on the 5G. So, those themes are also kind of emerging as like key kind of business operators that like manage data, set them up, with the sensors and kind of do it. So, which is really fascinating to me also.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up nodes on a mobile device. How prevalent is that?
So within, healthcare and even I would say in auto right now that we're seeing, so that, the individual can, upload information and take it to a shop and do it. It's still early days in development right now. So I would say most of our work, initially live applications have been B2B, not B2C, but we're seeing more and more in the different industries, kind of the need for that enablement. So we're doing several different proof of concepts out of our office of the CTO, experimenting with it, testing it, dog fooding with some clients to see how it works and, if it's scalable. So, but starting to see kind of that need more and more across the different industries.
Nice. Yeah, that's fascinating. And, along those lines, have you run across, with this convergence effect, scenarios where you're like, oh, wow, this is like sci-fi Jetsons type of scenario, where you're just completely surprised kind of the orchestration of these technologies? Or has it been, oh yeah, okay, I can kind of see that, that's kind of within the realms of what I would expect?
some of this smart city work that they've been doing with, paying meters, paying paying your tolls, being able to exchange tokens with other cars so you can during less congested hours of driving and really futuristic to the point where even funding the municipalities to build the roads and the schools. So it's really that tokenized economy. Some of the stuff I had never kind of thought through, but you have the city of Los Angeles really engaged in kind of this tokenized economy, which is really fascinating when we were out there working with Moby, the auto consortium, and really looking to the future of how they could make their city more efficient, save money. Again, kind of that theme of lowering expense ratio, but also in the future, new ways of taxation, right? Of generating actual income for these cities and states. So no, I think that's some of the futuristic stuff that, putting kind of the whole tokenized economy literally together in one, from the cars to the buildings to the roads, and scaling it from there.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think the smart city world is really, really interesting. There's stuff that's being done here in Columbus, Ohio. They won the Paul Allen Award, the nationwide smart city contest, and got a huge grant. And now they're creating the playbook for everybody else. So if you haven't checked it out, you can actually do a search and find it pretty easily. It's all out there, available for free. There's no paywall or anything like that. But definitely check that out. They've got some really, really interesting scenarios, very similar to what you're thinking. But also like the project NYC is an interesting one as well. And they're, gaining inspiration from, what's happening in Paris, where they're saying, hey, let's eliminate roads for cars and make them pedestrian walkways. And they've actually improved their congestion as a result, which is counterintuitive to how you would traditionally think about it. But just based on just looking at the patterns and using AI to kind of run these simulation models, they've been able to say, well, actually, if you do this, it's going to help us, given what's there and the type of patterns, etc. But also, we're on the cusp of some really interesting innovations with autonomous things. And, whether that be an autonomous vehicle, which I think there will be two types. There'll be a type that is on the road, and there'll be a type that's in the air. And, this may sound controversial, but I personally think that we're going to see a level 5 autonomous vehicle in the air before we see it on the road. And the reason why is we control everything up in the air. We don't control everything on the ground. There's a lot of human intervention that happens. And if there is basic issues of just trying to deal with a 4-way intersection, I mean, I don't know about you, but some of the most frustrating moments on the road is in a 4-way intersection when you're like, okay, guys, we're taking turns here. It's your turn now. Will you go? Things as simple as that. And that's actually one of the scenarios that really screws up an autonomous vehicle, because the autonomous vehicle knows what to do. It's just human beings are sometimes distracted doing other things or other factors at play. I don't know. But I think that this whole autonomous effect is going to fundamentally shift our cities, and it's going to, how we transport from urban centers to suburbia to maybe even regional. We're going to be more effective with our transportation. There's going to be more ride sharing because, buying a vehicle at, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 when you're only utilizing it 3 to 4% of the time. That's how much on average we utilize our vehicles, even less now during the pandemic. So who from a business perspective, who would ever think that that's a great investment of your money? You've only used an asset 3 to 4% of the time. Most of the time it's in your garage or in a parking lot somewhere. Not a very good investment. So how can you maximize that investment? So if you've got an autonomous vehicle and you can say, while my car's in the garage, I'm going to let it go out and join the Uber network to ride share. Well, great. Now it's earning money for me, right? And so I think there's going to be more of those effects, which means zoning is going to change. Parking lots are going to be minimized. Maybe a lot of them go away. And how do we reclaim that space? With the smart office, but also with the global pandemic, what we're realizing is with remote work, maybe we don't have to come to these big cities and these office buildings. So what's going to happen there, and how do we reutilize that infrastructure that we've built in these urban centers? And so I think that there's going to be a lot of challenging of the traditional norms from a societal perspective. And, you know, I look at this as akin to the turn of the 20th century. You know, we're going to be in a scenario, I think, at our age range where we may be telling our kids, hey, we used to drive places, right? Our kids might say, "Hey, maybe the primary mode is to be driven somewhere, or maybe our grandkids." But it's going to be I think, in our lifetimes where we're going to have that conversation, and our kids or grandkids are going to look at us and say, "You did what? You had to drive places? You had to call people to coordinate, and you had beepers and this and that." Even that, just 10, 15 years ago, we look back and we're like, "Oh wow, I can't believe we, had to coordinate in this very archaic way." And so I think we're on the cusp of something really interesting, but there's going to be major societal, behavioral waves as a result of that. And so it's definitely going to be an interesting time. And the convergence of these technologies, and I look at it in multiple different areas. I look at, there's the communication side, where we've got ubiquitous communications, whether it be cellular. We don't talk enough about Wi-Fi. I think Wi-Fi is still very important. It's still very beneficial. Um, Near field communications, all this stuff is going to work together. LiDAR, radar, all these different technologies. But also our data, and being able to use that. And we've been talking a lot about the data here on this podcast, but having data at our fingertips that we haven't been able to use before. Or it's been locked in a mainframe silo somewhere where you had to pay to get it, etc. And then there's the intelligence bit that's enabling smart things and autonomous things, but also it's what I personally am looking forward to is the AI doing things on my behalf, because I'm lazy. Why should I turn my lights on when I walk in the room? The room should already know to do that. It knows what I like and don't like, so just do it, right? So I think these AI algorithms are going to provide a level of intelligence, and it's going to be slow. It's not going to be overnight, because AI is, again, just like blockchain, really, really, really overly hyped. And I think that infrastructure is going to look very, very different in the future as well. Not only with cloud computing and just all the services that are being enabled in cloud, but also with quantum. And on a future episode, I've got some quantum people going to come on. We're gonna really geek out on physics and all that, on what the heck quantum is, and what it can do, and even what it's doing right now, and it doesn't even exist right now. And we've got essentially a technical term, quantum annealing, which is essentially simulated quantum computing. And what that's going to do to what you'd mentioned earlier around the encryption methods. It'll be able to decrypt that SHA encryption in 100 seconds. Where we take I forget what the number is, like a million years or something like that with classical computing. So it will definitely be a game changer. But by that point, we're going to have quantum proof algorithms anyway. So that argument, I don't think, really applies anyways, unless you're a federal government like the US or Russia or China, which are the ones that have invested majorly in quantum computing. They could probably have the capability in the near future. But as far as you and I hacking some bank, probably not going to happen. So, yeah, definitely got opinions about it.
It's the fourth industrial revolution, right? Seeing all these convergence of different technologies is really going to kind of unleash the potential of what technology can do and be extremely impactful in ways that probably you or I can't even imagine.
Oh, yeah. And I tell people, I say, look, I can give you predictions all day long. I got an opinion on most things. But here's the thing. Looking out past 2 or 3 years, it's all rainbows and unicorns. You know, a lot of these innovations are driven by non-technology drivers. So, as an example, I've talked to a lot of automotive companies, and there's a lot of, well, a few years ago, there was a lot of consternation around autonomous and what that means and how they should adjust their strategy. And it really came down to, well, if the Department of Transportation, if we think that they're going to pass that level 4, level 5 autonomous vehicles are street legal by 2022. Well, that's going to influence our investment strategy and our innovation efforts. But if we look at that and say, well, it's probably not going to pass till 2025 at the earliest, probably 2028. Well, that's a whole different story. And so, very small things, a president change where they say, hey, we're going to go gangbusters on green and technology could fundamentally change that outlook. So, anybody that tries to go and do these predictions, it's great scenario planning, which we should all be doing. What if this, then what happens? But it has to be looked at as multiple versions of a possible future rather than this is the future. At least that's my opinion.
No, I agree.
So you developed a white paper around some of this, didn't you?
Yeah, so we did a white paper with all kind of the industry leads on, COVID and what's the impact on various industries and, kind of canvassing and like doing interviews. And, we did a bunch of, the head of supply, Alyssa, is on the ICC with a bunch of the banks. So what's the impact to them? And, are they the small business loans getting to the end users in the time they need them? Like where are the pain points? Where are the breaking points? Where are the systems working? Is business as usual? And kind of like figuring out like, where we could help, but also really, right now we're more just kind of being an ear to listen like to their stories. And it's been fascinating about, how some of these models just are fundamentally disrupted. Like COVID has showcased where they have massive business weaknesses that like they can't put band-aids on their current systems. They're going to have to completely kind of reimagine their full technology stack. And it's been really interesting, like to your point, like talking to clients and hearing where they are in their journey and how they're starting to think about this. And, where, their innovation budgets as well as digital transformation budgets and how they're going to have to increase that to get business back up and operating, as well as new systems in place that, weren't there in the past. So, we expect to see, a pretty massive uptake, especially with the more paper-laden businesses, insurance and trade that, are typically a little bit more archaic than other industries out there, kind of take a much faster adoption, as well as digital currency. Right, we're doing a lot of work with several central banks on this. I don't know about you, but when I go to the grocery store now with my mask on and the person hands me the receipt, I'm like, no, thank you. Like, it's so you think about currency. It's completely changing, shifting people's mentality and how they're thinking about money and the need for it, as well as going pure digital. So I think that several of these industries are going to shift. I think that, certain ones, because of this disruption, will move faster because of this. At the end of the day, not necessarily because they want to, but realizing to get kind of up to the operating levels they need and as well as efficiencies, it has to be kind of a digital first strategy. So I think it's going to be really interesting post-pandemic, like kind of what we see going on with technology and the convergence of it.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the grocery store. It's one of those things where, I would try to convince my family to, order groceries online and, have them wheel it out to your car and load it up for you and this and that. And then when this whole pandemic occurred, it was like, okay, we have to do this and this and that. And now there's this sudden realization. It's like, why haven't we been doing this all the time? And it's like, yes, I've been telling you, again, the lazy guy, just have them, click, tell them what you want, save your order. And then when you want to order it next week, you just go click, and then they wheel the stuff out to your car and put it in your trunk. Right. And
the supply chain with cleaning supplies. You actually physically have to go first thing in the morning or you don't get them.
Right.
Because the app always
or if you know how to hack Instacart but that's a whole nother set of strategies we can talk about later. But yeah, I think that a lot of this pandemic has forced people to live in a digital world where they didn't have to before. They had the luxury of saying, oh, okay, maybe, but I don't know. I don't know if that's for me or not. So I'm just not going to do it. Not even try it. But now they're forced to try, and now they've got a taste of it, and they're like, oh, yeah, why was I doing this? Like, I talked to my wife, and she's like, yeah, there's for all these basic things, why do I need to go there? And then for other things like, you know, toilet paper and paper towels and, you know, whatever reoccurring thing, why can't we just do a subscribe and save thing through Amazon and not even think about it? Why do we even have to? We know what our family needs on a recurring basis. Just have that bad boy show up on our doorstep. And so I think it's going to force a whole new set of behaviors, and again, force that conversation around creating these ecosystems. Because right now, if you talk to the third-party logistics providers like your FedExes and UPSs and DHLs and all that great stuff, they weren't built to support these microtransactions where I can go on Amazon and order a toothbrush and just have the toothbrush sent to me next day, right? That model didn't exist until Amazon came along. And so now the margins are eroded from these companies because that's not how they built their business model. They built it based on large parcels, weight, and all this other great stuff. So I think you're right. I think the pandemic is not only exposing a health crisis, but it's also a behavioral and societal crisis as well that is interweaved into this, because it's going to force a whole new set of behaviors and a whole new set of expectations from not only the workforce, but also from consumers as well.
Yeah, so it's too early to understand, right, the long-term implications, but we're definitely at a rare turning point. It's a human tragedy what's happened, affecting hundreds of thousands of people, and it affects everyone's behavior in ways that I don't think anyone could have ever suspected or predicted in the past. So it's definitely going to be a new normal, kind of exiting this
Yeah.
in
And like you
2000.
said, when we exit this, we haven't even exited it yet.
You know,
So it's going to
wishful
be interesting.
thinking.
The white paper, where can people find the white paper?
Yeah, so if you go to r3.com, the white paper is there, free to download. There's no cost associated with it. We're also doing several webinars as well as, client wine tasting events in this new normal, since we can't go see clients, and a bunch of different other, very industry specific webinars. So I encourage you to check on r3.com under the research. Please download it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Always happy to put you in touch with the SMEs on each industry, but, really trying to help these companies as they go through this journey, and support them as we're seeing this convergent attack, and really help enable them to, be in a stronger position when we exit this pandemic.
So as we start to wrap up, what are some of the key things you want folks to take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, I think some of the key things, we talked a lot about ecosystems and the proper way to construct them and build them versus buying them. One thing I always encourage is experimenting and testing it, right? You're never reading about all the papers in the world is great, but until you actually experience it and start building with this technology and seeing what new potential revenue source it unlocks. So, always encourage people to kind of get their hands wet and dirty and get involved in this. There's a ton of resources out there that can help, from us, from you, as well as other organizations like the World Economic Forum, as well as, starting to, in addition to experimenting, starting to think about how these technologies work together, right? So like once you have the data in a synchronized fashion, in a secure fashion, that immutable record where you can see the data back to the beginning, what that could truly unleash for your organization. Because other companies out there are doing it. And I feel like those are going to end up being kind of the leaders out there. Post pandemic, there's going to be a lot of laggards and a lot of, followers, but there's also going to be some new trends that emerge. And, I just encourage people to get out there and start, building and using and, reaching out if they have any questions.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. I think we covered a lot of ground, especially on the do's and don'ts and best practices around these things. I think we did a good job. At least I personally think we did a good job on some of the demystification around some of this, which I think is important for people to understand. Why should I do this? When should I use it? When shouldn't I go down this path? So I think there's a lot of goodness there. So now, obviously people are going to ask, Ryan, super smart gal, I want to talk more. How do people get in touch with you?
So my email is ryan.rugg@r3.com. I
Oh,
always am
wow.
open.
You gave out the email
I
address.
gave it out. I gave it out. Always open to conversations, and if it's not for my team, happy to kind of point you in the right direction. I make it a point to answer all my LinkedIn requests, even if it may be a period after when I have time and like stuck on an airplane, or I say it used to be stuck on an airplane traveling. But I encourage people to reach out. This is a collaborative effort. We have to work together, and that's really what's the most powerful thing about this technology. So yeah, that's how direct I am, Mike.
I love it. Well, very good. Well, listen, Ryan. As always, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was an absolute pleasure, and very excited to be on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.